everyone, this is Warhawk Beyond 2040, bringing to you another edition of the Wrestling Discussion Series. And February 16th, 1997 marks 28 years ago that history was made when the ninth wonder of the world, Chyna, made her WWF debut at In Your House 13, the Final Four, and would go on to be a trailblazer and helping to put the women's division on the map. And for today's special edition, I am going to be discussing the success and failures of Chyna's WWF career from February 1997 to May 2001. So, Chyna, born Joan Marie Laura, started her wrestling career in 1995 and was trained by the legendary Killer Kowalski. And for those of you who know that name, Killer Kowalski trained another wrestler who would go on to play an important role not only in Chyna's professional career, but in her personal life as well. And that other wrestler was, of course, the one and only Paul Levesque, better known as Triple H. So, when you think of ladies in wrestling, you don't necessarily think of ladies mixing it up in the ring that much. Now, throughout wrestling's existence, ladies in wrestling were always there for one reason: to look pretty. They were never really looked upon as wrestlers. They would always be there as a manager to support their guy. You very rarely ever saw ladies mixing up in the ring. You had a couple of exceptions: the Fabulous Moolah, Mae Young, and Alundra Blaze, to name a few. And of course, when you think of female wrestling managers, you think of Terry Runnels, Sunny, and Sable. Sable, of course, would shake off that managerial tagline and carve out her own in ring wrestling career. And of course, how can we forget the lovely Miss Elizabeth, who, in my opinion, is the greatest female wrestling manager of all time. And then fast forward to the late 90s to the 2000s onwards to the more recent and current modern era. When you think of the women's division, you think of two names: Trish Stratus and Lita, two of the biggest names ever, who, for my money, were the Rock and Stone Cold of that division. They helped bring a lot of interest into the division and helped make it an integral part of the show at a time when you didn't really have things like that going on. They never really made it a proper thing like it is now. And of course, you had other female wrestlers who played their part in helping to get the division over: Jacqueline, Victoria, Ivory, Jazz, Molly Holly, and of course we've got current wrestlers like Becky Lynch, Sasha Banks, Paige, Charlotte Flair, Liv Morgan, Rhea Ripley, Zelina Vega, to name a few. They've all played their part in making the women's division what it is today. And even Gail Kim as well, who would help really put the women's division on a much higher level in TNA with her excellent legendary matches against Awesome Kong. So everyone has all played their part, whether it was WWE or TNA. Everyone has done a phenomenal job in putting the women's division on the map. Even currently in AEW with wrestlers like Toni Storm and Mariah May, who have done an excellent job in adding a lot of brutality and violence to the women's division. But would any of this have been possible if it weren't for this one person? This one person who came along very quietly and made a huge impact, and as far as I'm concerned, not only changed the rules, but completely changed the game and the way females were looked upon and perceived in the wrestling business. And the one person who, for my money, made the women's division what it is today is, of course, the ninth wonder of the world, Chyna. Now, Chyna made her WWF debut in 1987 on February 16th at In Your House 13, the Final Four. My first impression of Chyna when she made her debut was she was huge, physically like a powerhouse. She had a jaw dropping physique that you only ever saw female bodybuilders had, not necessarily in wrestling. She was very tall for a lady, and she was just an incredible presence. And I've always said that Chyna was the Xena warrior princess of wrestling, that she was very attractive and could fight. Now, I'm not going to lie, at the time Chyna made her debut, I never really found Chyna attractive at all. I thought she looked too manly, she looked too muscular. Don't get me wrong, she had a very impressive physique, but she never really screamed hot, which I'll get to later on. But there was just something so fascinating about her that you just couldn't help but look at her. And the way she carried herself, she never said a word. She was just this very quiet, scary, intimidating person. And she came in through the crowd during a match that was featuring Triple H versus Goldust, and she came in and manhandled Terry Runnels, who was under the name Marlena, who was managing her real life husband at the time, Goldust, also known as Dustin Runnels. And when I first saw her, I thought, holy cow, she's not real. She's just so monstrous, almost like a living She Hulk. Okay, I know what you're thinking. I understood that reference. Yeah. Get away from that. Stick to the business. Anyway, so she became Hunter Hearst Helmsley's manager slash bodyguard. Now, the story behind the scenes was Hunter was looking for a bodyguard, and Vince would put him with different guys who would be more like a manager. Back in 1996, Mr. Perfect was Hunter's manager, but that didn't last too long because Mr. Perfect would sign with WCW. So they would try to put him with different people. And the story was that him and Shawn Michaels were going to the gym and they came across this massive, muscular lady doing weightlifting and doing push ups and bench presses. And their faces lit up, as you can imagine. It's Hunter and Shawn. They're like, ooh, this could work. And the story was that WCW had their eye on her and they were going to possibly put her with the NWO. So Hunter and Shawn took the idea to Vince and said, you've got to sign this lady, make her Hunter's bodyguard. Vince's initial reaction was, oh, don't be silly. No one's going to take that seriously. A female beating up the guys? Not a chance. And Shawn's attitude was, that's the point. What better way to get heat for Triple H than have a lady fight his battles for him? He's hiding behind a lady. That makes him a coward. Perfect. And throughout 1997, after Chyna became Triple H's bodyguard full time, she would constantly get involved in his matches, delivering low blows left, right, and center, manhandling Terry Runnels at every opportunity, but she never talked. No one knew who she was, no one knew where she came from. All everyone knew was she was with Triple H. And Chyna, for me, as far as an on screen presence, was very unique. No one had ever seen anyone like her. And she would go on to have a very important and integral part in the show and in the show's angles. And it's quite amazing. When you first look at China, you just think, oh, she's just going to be here for a couple of months and then she'll be gone. She stuck around for a long time. And for me, China was a big part in playing the rise of Triple H to the top. Not in the same way that Stephanie McMahon did, but just in a different way. There's just something about China. She really helped make Triple H more hated as a heel, but she had that presence. You want to go after Hunter, but you got to go through China. And believe me, when you see those arms crossed and that stone face, no one's going to go through her. She was like the ultimate brick wall for Hunter. And trust me, nobody wanted any piece of China. She truly was the ninth wonder of the world, larger than life. And later on, Triple H and Chyna would hook up with Shawn Michaels and they would form, quite possibly perhaps, the greatest faction of all time, or certainly one of the greatest ever, D-Generation X. Now, this is where Chyna, for me, became more interesting and very fascinating, and later on, very attractive. Chyna's role, even going back to when she was just with Triple H, Chyna's role in DX was the bodyguard slash enforcer. Now, when you think of enforcers, one of the first names you come to mind is Arn Anderson from the Four Horsemen. You know, the muscle, the guy who'd go in and deliver the hits and the beatdowns. Chyna did the exact same thing for DX. No one would dare put their hands on Hunter and Shawn unless you had to go through Chyna, which was not an easy thing to do. And that's what made us so unique because in the history of wrestling with all the factions, you never had a female bodyguard. You always had a female in the group, but again, they would just be there to look good. That's it. Chyna was there to beat people up, kick ass, and protect her teammates and watch their backs no matter what. And everyone in DX looked at Chyna and respected her. And Chyna, in some strange way, she was like the mum, for a lack of a better term, of the group. She protected the boys and she wouldn't hesitate in beating someone up to protect her boys. Now, Chyna's look around this time, more so when Shawn left and Triple H took over DX, Chyna started becoming a little bit more vocal. She started becoming a little bit more attractive. She was still very muscular, but she didn't look as manly as she did when she first came in. And she had big roles in feuds against the Nation, more specifically in the feud against The Rock, and she was a big part of the feud against the Corporation. And Chyna, her look started changing more and more for the better. And even the commentators started to notice, say, hey, Chyna's looking good. Chyna's looking really good. And it's quite amazing, when you look at Chyna, just from being this monstrous presence to physically getting involved in the show, getting involved in the matches, and all sorts of things. And one example that came to mind was at WrestleMania 14, Triple H versus Owen Hart. She was handcuffed to Sergeant Slaughter because she was always getting involved in DX's matches, and she threw powder in Slaughter's face and low blowed Owen Hart, which led to Triple H delivering the pedigree and he retained the European title. That was a great example. Another example from the month before was at In Your House No Way Out in Texas. It was the 8-man tag: Stone Cold, Cactus Jack, Chainsaw Charlie, and Owen Hart versus Triple H, the New Age Outlaws, and Savio Vega. Sorry, Savio. Love you, but you're not HBK. Another example in that pay per view was Chyna got in the face of Stone Cold. No one would ever do that, let alone a lady. And Stone Cold delivered the stunner to her. So that said a message that Chyna was different. This wasn't just some lady protecting her man's back. She was a big part of the show. And that to me was very unique because Chyna wasn't just another lady just on the show. She was part of the show. And to me, that just made Chyna a very special and unique talent. And just like DX became fan favorites, so did Chyna as well. And for me, I've always said that Chyna played a very big role in the success of DX. Now, would DX have been successful without Chyna? They probably would have been, don't get me wrong, but I think just having her there made it all the better and more special because, as I said, it's very rarely you ever see a female play such a big role in the success of a faction. Hasn't been done before, hasn't been done since then. And Chyna, you know, she not only helped form DX, but she helped put DX on the map. And, for me, I love all of the incarnations of DX, but nothing will ever beat the original Triple H, Shawn Michaels, Chyna, and Ravishing Rick Rude. In fact, when DX became a trio after Rick Rude left, I think they got better. You know, it's just weird. Two guys and a lady. It just worked. It was just magic. It really was. And for Chyna, to mix it up with Stone Cold, getting in the face of Bret Hart, The Rock, you know, Undertaker, my God, all these names just shows you, as I said already, what a special and unique talent Chyna was. So fast forward to 1999, which for me was a very interesting and groundbreaking year for Chyna. She would screw DX and join the corporation, which for me was a real game changing moment. And that's a word that gets used a lot with Chyna, and there's a good reason for that. Chyna and changing the game. Now, when Chyna first came in 1997, she changed the game with the way she was portrayed and depicted, and the big role she would play in the show, and of course later on with DX and their huge success they achieved as a faction. Chyna always stayed in the background. Occasionally she might speak, but for the most part she was silent and she would only move when she needed to move. And that was interfere in Triple H's matches or interfere in her DX teammates' matches. She occasionally might deliver the low blow to a wrestler and whoever that may be. And at one point, Chyna did mix it up with some guys, but she very rarely ever competed in a match. So here we had Chyna essentially shocking the world, but this time in a negative way, turning on DX, more specifically turning on Triple H, and allowing to be cutting a promo and actually addressing her actions, which was quite rare because Chyna, as I said, didn't really talk much. And to see Chyna now a heel paired up with Vince and Shane in Vince McMahon's corporation was shocking because Chyna was the last person you expected to see turn on anyone because why would she? She's there to do her job. That's it. So it was quite a shocking moment. And of course, later on, playing a big role in the corporate ministry. Shocking stuff, to say the very least. And China, as great as she was as a babyface or as an anti hero, China worked so much better as a heel because of her presence and her physique. She was just the natural villain. And it wasn't a case of, I hate China, she's horrible. No, she wasn't horrible. She was downright frightening. Would you cross China? Would you cross someone who looks like that? Absolutely not. You would run a mile. You really would. So, 1999 saw China achieve a lot of firsts in her career. Chyna would be the first woman to ever compete in the Royal Rumble match. She would later on become the first woman to compete in the King of the Ring tournament. And later on, she would become the first female to ever win the Intercontinental title when she defeated Jeff Jarrett at No Mercy 99 in a housekeeping match. So, a lot of firsts for Chyna. Now, also around this time, Chyna was primed to challenge Stone Cold for the WWF title, much to the annoyance of Triple H. And here's the interesting thing because everyone knows that Chyna and Triple H were a real life couple. And although they weren't like that on screen, it was kind of hinted that they were more than just friends. Because let's face it, if you had a man and a woman working together that closely for that many years, as long as Triple H and Chyna did, you're bound to be more closer to the person you work with more than the people you know outside. It's normal, it's understandable, and it was obvious to me that Chyna and Triple H were more than friends. Although they didn't display any romantic tendencies on screen, I did kind of get the hints that they were because I remember originally growing up, I always thought Chyna was Shawn Michaels' girlfriend because of the way Shawn acted around her, grabbing her, and groping her, and patting her on the butt, and all sorts of crazy stuff. I thought, okay, so she's with Shawn Michaels. That's normal because Shawn Michaels is Shawn Michaels. He's the boy toy. He's so outrageous. He was the bad boy in DX. So I thought, okay, she's with him. When I found out later on she was actually with Triple H, I was quite surprised. I thought, okay. Shawn, I can kind of expect that because he was just completely over the top. He was into everything at the time. Triple H never got that impression with him. So it was quite surprising. So Triple H and Chyna would quietly go their separate ways. Triple H, of course, would go on to become the Game. He would go on to become the top heel in the company. And Chyna, later on in '99, she would mix it up with Chris Jericho in a feud that would go on for the second half of '99 all the way into 2000. And after they would get their business done, we would see Chyna hook up with Eddie Guerrero as his Mamacita. Now, this for me was where Chyna really came into her own as an on screen performer. Now, at first, when Eddie Guerrero and Chyna hooked up in 2000, they were initially portrayed as heels, but as time went on, they became very entertaining and some of their promos and segments were downright hilarious. And eventually, the fans started cheering them because they were so fun together and they had great chemistry. They really did. And even though Chyna and Eddie Guerrero were the complete opposites in terms of their personalities, they just worked so well together. And I looked at them as the Sonny and Cher of wrestling, very corny, but very loved up at the same time. And it was just fun. I loved watching those two together. And around this time, Chyna's look started to change more. She was still very muscular, but she got much more leaner and became a lot more feminine, probably a lot more feminine than she was when she was with Triple H and part of DX. So gone was the more manly look, and she started to look very, very pretty, more darker, longer hair, and she could still kick ass in the ring, but she was now more ladylike. And for me, that was Chyna looks wise at her very best. She started looking great probably around end of 1998 during her DX run. And 1999, she kind of had this little balance where she was very athletic, still very muscular, but a bit more on the feminine side. 2000, I would say she kind of evolved into a more traditional diva, but still, an ass kicker at heart. And she was great. She showed her versatility that she could kick ass and be entertaining at the same time. Whereas in the earlier years, she was portrayed as a lot more scary, silent, and cold, and never really said a word. She would just come in and just beat someone up and leave. You might get the occasional word out of her, but other than that, she didn't really show much personality. So after Eddie Guerrero and Chyna would split up, we would see Chyna reunite with her longtime friend and former DX teammate Billy Gunn, and then they would start mixing it up with the Right to Censor. Chyna specifically would mix it up with Ivory. This would lead to an angle where RTC broke her neck with a spiked pile driver, and they had a great match at the Royal Rumble 2001. Even though Chyna lost due to her neck, but I thought it was a great match, and it showed that Chyna can wrestle with the right opponent and that she can deliver. I think the matches she had with Chris Jericho, I think Jericho said that she was a bit too stiff because she wasn't a great worker. But I think with Jericho and Chyna, it wasn't a case of neither of them were great workers. I just don't think they gelled very well. But I still think the match they had at Survivor Series 99 was great. I thought that was probably the best match of that pay per view. Considering that Survivor Series 99 wasn't memorable other than Stone Cold getting run over. But other than that, no one really remembers that pay per view that much. But I thought the match they had at Survivor Series 99 was probably the best match of that show. But it showed that Chyna could work with the right opponent in the ring. And of course, around this time, Chyna put out an autobiography. She'd already posed in Playboy, which, by the way, anybody who has seen Chyna's Playboy pictures, smoking hot stuff. That's all I'm going to say. And then Chyna would make history and win the women's title at WrestleMania 17. It was pretty much a squash match, but I think it worked well for the story because Ivory and RTC had made Chyna's life a living hell for months on end. So for Chyna to just essentially humiliate Ivory at the biggest show of the year, it worked. And I'm really glad that Chyna got to win championship gold at WrestleMania. Well deserved. To go from being a bodyguard to winning the gold, what an amazing transition. And Chyna would pretty much defend the title, squash all of her opponents, and go on to have a great match with Lita at Judgment Day 2001. And that was essentially Chyna's last match in the WWF. She vacated the title. We wouldn't really see her on TV again, and she would get released in November 2001. Now, there's been speculation about how she left. Did she leave? Was she fired? Who played the part and who getting fired? We'll never know, really. But Chyna, after leaving WWF, she would do a lot of television work, and she would make some sporadic appearances in New Japan. She made a brief appearance in TNA where she teamed up with Kurt Angle. And that was pretty much it as far as her wrestling career was concerned. And even towards the end of her wrestling career, going all the way to like late 2000, she had a DX reunion with Triple H, Billy Gunn, and Road Dogg. It must have been obviously fun, you know, being back with DX, but it must have been incredibly awkward because around this time, Triple H was dating Stephanie McMahon in real life. So it must have been terribly awkward for Chyna. And, you know, essentially her ex was now married to the boss's daughter. Must have been a painful thing for her. Obviously, there are two sides to every story, but it is a shame that things ended the way they did because, Stephanie McMahon, I love Stephanie McMahon. You guys know I'm a huge fan of hers. And she did play a big part in Triple H getting over as an important, influential figure in the wrestling business, not to mention putting him on the map as the top heel. But I have to give credit where credit is due, or as everyone likes to say, give their flowers. Chyna was with Triple H in the dark days, you know, the days when he was a nobody with a silly gimmick. She stood by him in that long, bumpy road to the top. And I would even go as far as to say that Chyna was instrumental in helping Triple H become the game. Now, some people have said that Triple H only got to the top because he married Stephanie. That really depends on who you ask. But for me, Chyna helped put Triple H on the map as a top guy. You know, she was the backbone, she was the muscle for him. She watched his back. Now, obviously, they were more than friends, as we all know, but I don't think Triple H would be the game without Chyna. And Chyna, just as a talent herself, really changed the way female wrestlers were viewed upon and depicted in the show. And everything you see today, the women's division, NXT, the way the women's division is stacked like it is now, I would give a lot of that credit to Chyna. Yes, other ladies played their parts. Trish Stratus and Lita come to mind. They did their part as well, but you don't really have that conversation without mentioning Chyna first because she broke the mold. She helped make the women's division what it is today. And Chyna would never really be mentioned again on television. Sure, they would show her picture from time to time, but for the most part, we wouldn't really see Chyna on WWE television ever again. And after Chyna finished her career in wrestling, she would become an English teacher in Japan. And of course, it's been well documented that Chyna would go on to have a career in the adult porn industry, releasing several sex tapes, a couple with X-Pac, also known as Sean Waltman. But sadly for Chyna, as great as her wrestling career was, her personal life just slowly crumbled, and she would sadly pass away on April 20th, 2016, at the age of 46 after overdosing on pills and alcohol. And such a shame that a career like Chyna had to end the way it did. And she obviously would go on to be inducted as part of DX, which was well deserved. And I'm still hoping for the day that Chyna will be inducted into the Hall of Fame as a solo name. Because, as I said earlier, when you think of the women's division, you start with Chyna. She's the one that kicked all this off. I have been seeing recently on YouTube things about Chyna, showing a playlist of her entire career. So who knows? Triple H is now essentially running the company. Could he do the right thing by her by having her inducted into the Hall of Fame? He's going in. So could his ex-girlfriend slash DX teammate slash bodyguard go in as well? I personally would like to see that, as I feel that Chyna has more than earned the right to go into the Hall of Fame, and she definitely deserves it. I think everyone would agree with that. Chyna deserves to go into the Hall of Fame so that she can finally be recognised properly for her contributions to the women's division and for everything she's done, not just for DX, but for everyone she's ever worked with. So I think it would be a great opportunity to right the wrong, because I did hear that Chyna wanted to go into the Hall of Fame years ago, but unfortunately that didn't happen. So even though Chyna's not here with us anymore, but I still think it will be a great way to properly honour her memory. But like I said, we'll just have to see, really. So, in terms of the success and failures of Chyna's career, I'm going to go out and say a complete success, an absolute complete success. To see Chyna come in the way she did from 1997 and go out the way she did in 2001, and everything she achieved in those years was nothing short of amazing and absolutely incredible. No failures whatsoever, a complete success. And the thing about Chyna, I never heard a bad word about her. You know, very loved, very respected. Yeah, I might have heard one or two things. She may have had a bit of an attitude, but for the most part, I never heard a bad word about her. And to lose her at such a young age, 46 years old, is quite sad. But to look at her career and the legacy she leaves behind, it's just second to none. And what an incredible body of work to go from being a muscular bodyguard to one of the greatest female wrestlers of all time, certainly in her field. Unbelievable stuff. It really is. And she is still truly missed to this day. And it's still hard to believe that we're coming up to almost a decade, which will be in 2026, that Chyna has been gone. But wow, fantastic career. Would it have been nice to have had a longer career? Absolutely. But what she did, impressive. Damn impressive. So that's going to be it from me. I am going to wrap this up now. What was your thoughts on Chyna's WWF career? Did you look at it as a complete success or as a complete failure? What was your first impressions of her when she made her debut in 1997? Were you impressed or were you not impressed? Do you think she played a big part in the success of DX? What was your favourite moment from Chyna's career? What was your favourite match featuring Chyna? Do you think she did change the game? Do you think she did play a big part in helping to put the women's division over and helping to put it on the map? You know what to do, guys. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, leave your thoughts and comments down below, and I will see all of you next time for another edition of the Wrestling Discussion Series. So until then, take care, everybody, and stay safe. And once again, as always, much appreciated. Thanks for listening, and a special thanks to Chyna for everything she's ever done for the wrestling business and helping to put the women's division on the map and making it what it is today. You are truly missed, and thank you for all of the great memories you have given us, and may you rest in peace.